So Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio, friend of the show. Always great to have him back. Happy the return of Cactus League and Grapefruit League and spring training in baseball, Mike. Let's start with Nick Pivetta. I mean, seemingly a little bit out of nowhere. They hadn't spent any money. This isn't a huge cash deal, but what do you make of this addition? And thanks for hopping on.
Well, I think it was, really out of nowhere. It had been so quiet on Pavetta that I'm not sure that any of us really knew when he was going to sign or what the offers were. You know, he turned down the qualifying offer from Boston, which would have guaranteed him just over $21 million this year. So that was it was kind of, we were wondering how long this would drag out. I think from the Padres standpoint, you're right. It's not like over a 4-year span, not a whole lot of cash outlay, and it's certainly not in the short term. And I think between that and maybe the Michael King deal, we have a little bit more certainty on what exactly the Padres were trying to accomplish this winter, at least in terms of payroll. It wasn't so much that they were concerned about where things were long term. They just didn't feel like they had, at least ownership had not approved them to run a payroll for the season that was much higher than what it was. And so, being able to get Michael King to sign for, as low a number as he did this year, with the way that you can spread out bonuses, and for Pavetta to do basically the same thing, even though he's going to be up to $19 million next year, and this deal is heavily backloaded. Really creative way to go about it, and a great way to be able to allow them to fit in under what their budget constraints were. Keep King, add a starting pitcher, which they desperately needed, and it probably directly led them to adding their left field platoon. So, listen, Pavetta's not a star. He'll miss some bats. He's going to give up some dingers. He's kind of a perfectly cromulent 4th, 5th starter. And one that will get on a good run for a 10 to 12 start stretch where it will be better than that because he'll strike a bunch of guys out. But this is this definitely makes their club better than it was yesterday.
And with all the reports in the offseason surrounding, Dylan Cease earlier today and yesterday, it's been reported that they're maybe likely to keep Dylan Cease instead. And I said, Mike, tell me if you agree. I like the Nick Pivetta signing a lot, but if they trade Dylan Cease, then I don't really like it. If they keep Dylan Cease, then I like it even more.
Yeah, it depends on what they get back, right? Like if they were to trade Cease, it's if they were to get a deal that was similar to what Milwaukee had gotten last year for Corbin Burns, I think that would be pretty good, right? You get an everyday player who you control for 6 years in Joey Ortiz. You get a pitcher that you can dream on as either a starter or a reliever, albeit one with some history of injuries, and in DL Hall, who's hurt again. And you get a draft pick. Like, that's actually a pretty reasonable return. But I think they're clearly a better team if they hold on to Cease. And I think the freeing up of the money would have been to be able to add other pieces in other spots. It wasn't just to shed payroll. It would have been an effort to try and fill holes as well. So, listen, I think they're a better team with Cease. I think the way that they're constructed, their top 4 in the rotation is pretty good. I don't think it's quite as good as the Diamondbacks. I don't think it has the upside that the Dodgers do, but it's certainly good enough to be one of the teams that's squarely in the mix for a postseason berth. I think it should be a relief to Padres fans that they're not necessarily talking about moving Dylan Cease, that they can cross that bridge if things aren't going well at the deadline. And then if they are going well, then you're going to be able to slap a qualifying offer on him at the end of the year, and he can test free agency.
That's a really good point. Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio, with us right now, Jon and Jim. You mentioned the left field platoon. They hit, lightning in a bottle with Profar last year with the productivity for the dollars. What can this work, or what do you think about it? Hayward and Joe potentially splitting time in left field.
Yeah, I think it's probably not going to be as productive as Jerks and Profar. I don't think there's any way that it would. Hayward's a great makeup guy. If you get a chance to spend any time with him, he's just a really quality human being, a great dude, great teammate, great worker. He's been one of the best players in the league, and he's been one of the worst players in the league. So, he kind of understands all of that, and I think that makes him a really good resource for even somebody like Jackson Merrill, who, is going to have a different level of pressure going on him coming into year 2. Hayward's been there, right? So, and he's won. He's consistently been on teams that were in the postseason, and he's been a very, he has been a player whose production has varied year to year. But he's kind of found this role as a platoon guy, and I think he'll be okay. Joe is a guy that draws some walks, and he doesn't hit for a ton of power. He's fairly athletic. He can move around, play a couple of different positions. He's a local guy. I mean, he was on those USD teams with Chris Bryant. He's a guy that I think, is a nice role player on a good team. He just hasn't been on any good teams. He played for Pittsburgh and Colorado for the most part. And, but I like Connor Joe as that, like the 20, I guess for taking position players, like the 12th or the 13th position player on your team, where he's playing a weak side platoon role. And potentially filling in a couple other spots against some righties here and there. He's going to be fine. He'll hit for a decent average. He'll get on base. He won't hit for much power, but it's not going to be nearly as productive as what they got out of Profar. It would be a miracle if that happened.
AJ said that they're still looking at. Of course, he is. It's AJ Preller. He's always looking to tweak his roster any way possible. But Mike, when you look at this team, what do you think they still need to be added?
Yeah, I mean, I think they could use a bat. I mean, I still think that they could use somebody that can DH potentially. And, with the rumors that Dennis Lynn had this morning, I don't know if it would be rumors, but at least their willingness to talk about Suarez in a trade, that would free up some money to sign somebody like a Justin Turner, who I think would be a tremendous fit for the Padres for a lot of different reasons. So maybe that's something that still comes down the pipe. There's just not a whole lot of quality offensive players that are left. There's guys with warts like a Brendan Rodgers or, they could go back down the David Peralta route. I mean, certainly that worked out pretty well last year for them, right? I mean, he was very good. So those are kind of guys that are out there right now. The other thing is that they do decide to move Suarez. There's nothing to say that they don't get either a bat or maybe an extra bullpen arm or something like that back in the deal. That, while they save money, they're also still adding players to their major league roster. So, I think that's probably more likely what it is, but I don't think it's necessarily as pressing as a need as it was a couple of weeks ago when they really didn't have a left fielder and there was more uncertain at shortstop too. And the other thing I would think about is adding another catcher. I mean, I think it just depends on whether or not Luis Campusano's defense has come along enough that they feel confident in him. If it has, then maybe they don't need someone, but that's another position that I think is worth at least looking at for the Padres. And, AJ Pro is not afraid to make a deal, as you said, in the middle of spring training. That's certainly a good way to go about team building. And we saw the Arise deal in May. So I think he's going to be constantly looking for ways to upgrade a roster that they want to see get back to the postseason. They needed to get back to the postseason.
No doubt. Mike Ferrin, MLB Network Radio. What was your reaction to the Profar deal? Because locally, I think a lot of people felt, it's pretty reasonable. Maybe 3 years is a little long, but 14 a year for a guy that was as productive and has meant so much maybe internally to that franchise, kind of hard to see him walk. But again, the Padres just seemingly don't have the money to do it.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't at that point. If they had traded, let's say theoretically they had traded Cease, that would have freed up probably some
right
to be able to do that. But I don't know that it would have made sense to put all your eggs in that basket. And who knows, maybe Profar would have taken less to stay because clearly a good relationship with a lot of people with the Padres. I mean, I thought the deal was fine. It's not a deal. It's not like a crushing deal if Profar struggles. Atlanta certainly has the payroll flexibility to be able to absorb it if he doesn't. They needed somebody who could play left field. They needed somebody who could provide some offense while Acuna was out. And, I don't know exactly when Acuna is going to come back. They've been kind of slow playing the date on it, even though he was injured far earlier last season than he was when he blew out his knee in the 2021 season. So, I think there is a chance that, Acuna is ready earlier. But Profar gives them better depth in the outfield, and it means that they don't have to rely on, Jared Kelnick and Brian De La Cruz. So, yeah, the number was reasonable. I don't think it was out of bounds. I think 3 at 42 made a lot of sense, and I think he's going to be a good fit for the Braves. And here's the other thing is that this is a draw that, as much as he loved the Padres organization, the Padres loved him. Like, there are a lot of players who grew up in Curacao and Tua, and like they're not in Tua, but like in the ABC Islands that. Right. Were big Braves fans, in part because Andrew Jones was from Curacao, and they grew up watching him and watching the Braves. And Profar kind of talked about that too. So, that was a big reason why Kenley Jansen signed there when he was a free agent a few years ago, was because of that opportunity to play for the Braves. So maybe some of that evened it out too in his mind. I know he talked about the ownership situation being a key, but I think that's something that's like you have to think that there is a little bit of heartstrings there for a player from Curacao who's like, man, I got a chance to play for the team that I grew up watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Final one here, Mike, before we let you go. Were you surprised by the Bregman deal?
I guess maybe the number on it, but I thought it was like, I'll tell you what I was surprised by, and this may seem weird. I was surprised that he didn't take a 6-year deal, because that's what we had been hearing all along, was that he wanted a long-term contract. Now, I understand why he didn't. I mean, getting $40 million a year will certainly make you think twice about signing for 6 seasons.
Right.
So, like, I thought it was the Red Sox were super creative, right? They didn't want to be locked in long term. They wanted to give him the option to get out from under whatever they would owe, but they also wanted the player, and they wanted him for what's left of his prime years. And so they were far more aggressive in their offer than like the Cubs were, who didn't offer the most years or the most money on an AAV basis. And, like if you're Detroit, you're singing a little bit, right? Because you feel like you were close. You had a 6-year offer on the table. Granted, it was for less than what he was making last year. I think if that number had been like, let's say 190 instead of 171.5, I think it would have been a much tougher choice for Bregman. But for him, like, he can go if let's say he decides to stay all 3 years in Boston and he performs fairly well, there's nothing that says that he can't get that other, 40 or 50, or I guess it would be $50 million on the other side in a 3-year contract, maybe playing at 31, 32, 33. So he'd be like 34, 35, 36. Like, you could see that. And I just think I'm a big Bregman guy. I just think he's such a baseball rat. His baseball intelligence is off the chain. Like, he's just a really smart player that I think is going to be able to make adjustments as he gets older that keep him relevant into his late 30s until the skills fully decline.
Mike, I didn't ask you this off air, but you mentioned something about calling some college baseball tomorrow and putting 2 and 2 together. Are you doing this tournament with San Diego State in Arizona?
So I'm doing the Sunday game actually with San Diego State.
Very cool.
I'm heading out to their practice to go see Coach Cole here in a little bit. So I'll have the San Diego State Nebraska game on MLB.com. But the next 2 days I'll be over in Surprise, Arizona, the Sanderson Ford Classic, which is Oregon State's tournament that they open the season with every year. And it's actually a really good field this year. Oregon State, Indiana, who's a regional caliber team, Xavier, who's a surprisingly good program. They won 30 games 3 years in a row. So, and UNLV, who's kind of rebounding. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait till Sunday.
That's great stuff. That's awesome. Mike, always appreciate it. We'll do it when we get closer to opening day. Have great college baseball calls this weekend, including San Diego State and Nebraska as the Aztec season gets underway this weekend in Arizona. Thanks, Mike, as always.
Yeah, no problem. Take care.
Right, great stuff. Yeah. San Diego State's playing this weekend in Arizona, actually a week before the Padres start playing in Arizona. We'll react to that conversation. Plus, how many All-Stars does ESPN project for the Padres in 2025? That's next.